Hi, everybody. Thank you all for joining us in today's interview with special guest, Dr. Vera Tarman. Dr. Tarman is an expert in addiction and specifically food addiction. And I'm so excited to get my audience to learn about Dr. Tarman's work and why everything she's doing is so crucial. And I truly do believe this is the future of so many conditions, not just the carnivore diet and obesity and all those things. So, Dr. Vera Tarman, thank you so much for accepting my invite and welcome.
Oh, thank you. I'm delighted to speak on this subject wherever I'm asked. Thank you.
Awesome. So, Dr. Tarman, can you share a little bit with our audience your background and what your current day-to-day activities entail?
Okay, so I'm an addictions physician working out of Toronto, Canada, and I've been in the field since 2005, something like that. So almost 20 years. Although I don't work specifically with food addiction, I work in general addiction. It's an inevitable thing for at least half of my population. I work in a treatment center, so I see people coming in, quitting their alcohol, quitting their cocaine, quitting their even tobacco, cannabis, then they start eating and they go, why? And so, I just say, well, let's just connect the dots. So that's sort of that's what I do day to day. I work at a treatment center, and on my off time, I do the podcast, Food Junkies podcast, and my food addiction Facebook group. But generally speaking, it's addiction, and so that's the language that I speak when I talk about food.
Yes, and also you had a personal experience, right?
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Yeah.
So like so many young women in their 20s in university, I thought I was fat and wanted to lose weight and got into a real cycle, like so many of us do, of losing weight and then gaining it back and losing it and gaining it back. And what happened to me, which I think happens to a lot of people who get caught in that mess, is it just got worse over time. And in those days, and actually even today, that would have been called binge eating or bulimic behavior. I actually adopted bulimic behavior, and so I was convinced that that's what I was. But I couldn't find a solution other than I just kept trying to tell myself, I just have to eat whatever I want to eat, and don't try to get rid of it by throwing up or running too much or something, and it'll kind of pass. And it never did. And it wasn't until I got into the addiction field, started reading that literature, Nicole Avena is a very good example, that I thought, oh my God, I have to treat this like an addiction. And in those days, so this was now like almost 20 years ago, nobody was talking about it the way we are now. But I didn't realize that there were people in various parts of the world having their own discoveries. And so my discovery was, I have to treat this like an addiction. And then over the years, especially with the podcast that we do, I discovered a lot of people made that connection, but it never got affirmed. And I would keep talking myself out of it, like, don't be silly, you can't be addicted to food, go back and have a little bit of something. It wasn't until there was a real strong community of voices saying, yes, it's an addiction, that I was able to hold firm. And so I've been sugar-free and craving-free for at least 15 years.
Wow.
So it's possible. It is possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been listening to your podcast, Food Junkies. It's named after your book, right? Food Junkies is the book.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I would recommend people read the book as a sort of primer, as a start, because we take a lot of the people that are interviewed there, and of course the world gets bigger with this area, and we try to nab everybody and interview them at least some point.
Yeah. And the guests that you've had on your podcast are just phenomenal. I mean, I probably listened in maybe 1 week to around half of the videos already.
Oh,
it was like on repeat.
wow.
Yeah. It's really good. I mean, you've had everybody from Dr. Canberry to Dr. Silas. So I'm really excited for people to watch this interview on my channel and then go and check out your podcast. I'm going to make sure I link it in the description box below.
Oh, thank you. That's great.
So you are heading a rehab facility, correct? You're the director of a rehab facility in Canada.
Yes.
It's called, let me see if I remember. Rene something with an R-E.
Yeah, Renaissance. Renaissance. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And you did also have a program for food addiction.
Yeah, we for 3 years we had a program that a donor funded. They approached me and said, "I believe in this cause. How can I donate something?" And I said, "I got a great idea. Donate to Renaissance to allow us to build a program," which we did for 3 years. But you know, the idea was to get it started and then maybe sustain itself, which
That didn't happen.
we weren't able to do because COVID hit and then it just never picked up after that. But for those 3 years, it was amazing because we need, food addiction is a range of conditions, as it were, and it's a chronic progressive thing that changes over time. And there are people at the end of the spectrum, like the severe stage of food addiction, who require like a month of being locked up away from their drug of choice, which in this case is food, and to learn the same tools that we teach our cocaine and our crystal meth and our opiate addicts. They were sitting in the same room as those folks. And the language was the same. Everybody had the same understanding. You have this relentless obsession about food or something, food, sugar, specific food, and you can't get it out of your head. That was the same as the crystal meth person sitting right next to them. And it was a very powerful experience for them. And all the people who left that program and continued the relapse, the addiction tools that we taught them, relapse prevention, support,
You froze for
it's the ones who said, okay.
Yeah, no, but it's just for a split second, but I got it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's the ones who didn't really buy into it that went back out. The same way as the person who thinks, I think I can have 1 or 2 drinks now that I've been sober for a long time. And then, of course, they can't. They can for maybe a week or 2, or if they're lucky, 3 months, and then they're back. And the same thing happens with food.
Do you consider addiction to be a disease?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. So what is a disease? When we're talking psychiatry, which is what this is, it's a psychiatric disorder. I actually like the word disorder more. So like depression, what is depression? What is anxiety? We don't actually know what it is. We have theories that it's a neurochemical imbalance of not enough serotonin, or with ADHD, too much dopamine, or not enough in the frontal part of the brain. Similarly with food addiction, we can use that challenge, and on that level it is. But I like the word disorder because it's more than just, like we mentioned at the very beginning before we started, like with a carnivore diet, you remove all the triggering foods, which tend to be processed carbohydrates, but a person is still living with this sometimes we call it a beast. I know Bitten Johnson calls it the red dog. Like there's something still within that is hungering, and the addiction piece tries to address that. And that's not just physiological, that's also psychological. So, and then also you get all these people who say addiction isn't a disease, it's a matter of choice. And we're saying it's an actual disorder in the brain. Like if you want, you can say it's a habit, a bad habit that has become so entrenched that it doesn't actually remove. You have to learn to live with it in a safe way. So you could use the word disease, but disorder will work just as well. But what does happen is there is a brain change, with whatever you want to call that.
Right.
There is a fundamental change in the brain that potentially does not repair back to stage 1 or square one.
Okay, so that's the key here, right? Because I agree with everything you just said. I look at it as a disease or disorder, similar to how diabetes is a disease or a disorder, right?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Like a diabetic, if they're eating well and their sugars are normal, they still have the disorder. It's just it's in remission, and that's the same thing that happens with food addiction and depression and anxiety and everything else.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree with you too. Like we don't like to call it even disorder. We kind of don't like to call it that because we're not supposed to be targeted with highly addictive foods. It's really the presence of this unnatural substance that's now causing symptoms in us. So where's the real issue? Is it us that we have a disorder, or is it the fact that we have drugs literally being
The way that
marketed to us.
you've described it, I would say food addiction. Yeah, the way that you describe it, I would say food addiction is a normal body response to an abnormal environment. And that's how it starts. Because how does addiction start? It's a brain adaptation to excessive stimulation. But then once that's happened, then we do have to own it. Like, it started out there, but now something's changed in me. Just like if I'm a diabetic, now my insulin, now I'm more insulin resistant even on a good day. So I'm going to have to be extra careful. But so there is something that's fundamentally changed. But you're right, it's the body that's prepared itself for an onslaught of excessive stimulation, mainly through sugar and refined
Yeah,
carbohydrates.
yeah, I love it. You know, I did my dissertation on sugar addiction, believe it
You
or
did?
not. I did.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm a classically trained dietitian, so I have, my bachelor's, my master's in nutrition and dietetics, and then I did my doctorate at the University of Miami in the effect of a high intensity interval training exercise bout on chocolate addiction, parameters, variables for chocolate addiction, like attentional bias, affect, mood, and
Yeah.
yeah. And so I
Wow.
had to do a really deep dive into that. And back when I wrote my literature review, it was around the year 2015. So the studies on comparing sweet taste to heroin weren't out yet. Those came out in 2017.
Uh-huh.
So somehow I knew that the rats prefer the sweet taste over cocaine. Even if you increase the dosage of the cocaine, the rats will still have a preference for the sweet taste. And you
Uh-huh.
would think at that point I would stop having the Atkins bars and things like that. It didn't really click for me. Isn't that
Uh-huh. Yeah.
interesting, the denial, how strong it is?
Oh,
And then,
absolutely.
yeah. And
If,
then,
if
yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say kudos to you, because studying, you said that you were studying in nutrition and diet, and that's not an that area. I mean, I'd love to speak with you specifically. That area does not embrace food addiction, like, even to this day. Like, you are an unusual creature. And thank you for being open-minded.
Thank you so much. It's because of my own struggles that pushed me to learn so much more. It's like the amount of information that I've had to gather by reading the books and watching the podcasts and all this kind of stuff is,
Huh.
it's really 99% of my knowledge base, whereas everything I learned through traditional academia is like just 1% because it was so basic.
Yeah.
And like you said, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and I'm sure the history there, right? And they're one and the same. I mean, they work with the food companies. They invest in companies like
Yes.
Coca-Cola. I mean, wild things. So,
Yeah.
and when you're 18, 19 and you want to become a dietitian, you just, everything they tell you, you accept it and you try and you
Yeah.
blame yourself when it doesn't work. It's like, oh, I just needed more willpower, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much. So it wasn't until recently that I came across the 2017 studies. I am familiar with three of them. There might be more, but there are at least three studies that show how the rats prefer saccharin, which is a sweet taste, by a
Yes.
very large margin over heroin. And
Yeah.
so that blew my mind. That I feel like kind of snapped me out of my denial for whatever
Yeah.
reason. I think we have more of a taboo associated with heroin as compared to cocaine, or at least in my mind, maybe.
Huh.
And
Uh-huh.
so when I started sharing that, some of the backlash I received was
Oh,
about how, well, you don't see anybody holding up a bank or a homeless person because,
oh,
what would you
yeah.
say to that?
Yeah, I get that. I get that too. It's especially now in today, where we have the fentanyl crisis and people are like literally dying. Young people, like the next day, they're thriving and healthy, and then they're dead. And they say, how can you make that comparison? And you can say for sure that cocaine and heroin addiction are more dramatic addictions, more immediate. That's the key. They're more immediate. in their damage to a person. Because any drug that you take, if it goes to the brain quickly and excessively, is more addictive. But food is kind of like cigarettes. It's a slow, almost under the radar addiction, but it actually kills people in larger numbers than opiate and cocaine, which is, in the larger population, maybe 10%, maybe. With food addiction, it's 60, 70% when we start calling it diabetes, high blood pressure, any of the metabolic disorders. Like, why do people die? They die of those conditions. And of course, we all have to die, but our lifespan is around 80-ish, something like that. And we could theoretically be healthy until 75. But we're having people dying at 50, 55, and that's not so it's kind of like pick your poison, or pick your cause. The immediate aggressive death of a young person, very heart-rendering, or the general population of slow gradual death sort of after the age of 50. It's just as devastating, but it's on a different, it's like apples and oranges.
Yeah, exactly. And I also was doing research on that to see, what could explain this difference in the way we perceive addiction and the
Yes.
intensity of addictions. I think people have this idea that only if you're gonna die right away from it, or in the span of 2-3 years, then that means it's a more serious addiction.
Yes.
The truth is, it might be in a societal cost, more intense, more quicker,
Yeah.
consequences, but doesn't mean that the pull that drug has on your brain is stronger. That's
Yeah.
the thing, because
That's it.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's why I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I read that the criteria for addiction, they've removed even like tolerance, and they've removed even
Withdrawal. They can
withdrawals.
remove withdrawal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
how strong your pull and how much loss of control you have over that substance,
Yes.
that doesn't have to do with whether or not you're going to die in 2 or 3 years or not, right? And this is why we see those rat studies where the rats are pretty much preferring the sweet taste all the
Yeah.
time, even over heroin. So that means the pull of the sweet taste is much stronger than the pull of the heroin.
That's right. And that, that actually makes sense. One of the reasons why people get so up in arms about that is that they don't see that pull on themselves, because it's everywhere. People have a muffin in the morning and then they have a toast in the afternoon, or vice versa, and they don't see it themselves. But when we give them the challenge, okay, no sugar, like I'll say, I haven't had sugar for 15 years. And usually those people, their jaw drops and says, what? And to me, it's like, yeah, it's not that hard. But to them, it's hard because they're not actually seeing that hardness is actually what they perceive as impossible, as part of the addiction speaking. So there's that piece too, that most of society is addicted and doesn't even see it. We call that denial in the addiction world. The more you're in it, the less you see it in yourself. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is that our body is engineered to desire sweet, because our brain needs glucose. And of course, we have a backup system of ketones, but you have to adapt to that. The default mode, especially if you've been eating a lot of carbohydrates, is to prefer glucose. So, which means you want. And so we're already built, especially if we've been eating in this world for high carbohydrate world forever, we're built to prefer sweets. Heroin and cocaine go to that system, that sweet preference system, and then mimic it by giving what essentially is like a super sweet. But it's actually a mimic. The food is actually the thing that the brain was made for. So it would make sense that we would be more quickly addicted to something that we were made for, more than something that had to look like, hijack and look like. So heroin looks to the brain like sugar, but it isn't sugar. But sugar is sugar. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Which is why I've had many people, and please listen to this, folks who are listening. I've had many people, crystal meth, I think, is one of the most devastating addictions. And of course, opiates, because fentanyl, because people are dying. But in terms of the pull, the psychological pull of crystal meth, it's one of the most devastating. Like, it's just hard to break the lead. But I've had crystal meth people say sugar was harder. They got off the crystal meth because they went on to the sugar, and now they're getting fat, and they're like, oh my God, I gotta quit. And they can't. And literally, I've had people say it's harder than crystal meth. It's just, you see the drama of crystal meth. With sugar, it's, you got diabetes, so does everybody else in society. There's no drama, but it's still bad.
Wow, I keep hearing that over and over again, especially now that I'm delving deeper into the addiction world.
Uh-huh.
So many people, like you said, yeah, they struggle with all kinds of addictions, heroin, cocaine, alcoholism, and they just can't, they struggle the most with the sugar. It's
Yeah,
incredible. It's chilling. And you know, another thing is that the studies that we have right now, they are chilling in and of themselves, just knowing that the sweet taste is so much more addictive, right? But the
yeah,
problem is that what we have surrounding us is an even worse combination. It's the carbohydrates and the sweetness plus the fat. And that,
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, we know this is even more addictive than just pure white sugar.
yeah.
So, you
That's
know,
right.
this stuff scares me.
Yeah, yeah, fat is a really good medium to carry more sugar. It's kind of like the alcoholic who says, if I use a bit of cocaine, I can drink more. It's kind of like that. They synergistically work well if you want to get higher. And because you know, it's hard to just eat straight sugar after a while, but you can eat a lot of sugar in fat. So yeah, you're right. It's definitely, that's why ice cream is so popular.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And this is why, you know, 95% of people cannot lose weight and maintain the weight loss. Everybody can lose weight for a short period of time, but 95%
Yes,
of people regain all of the weight, right, within
that's
one
right.
year.
Yeah.
So when people are skeptical about this, I think just, I mean, look around you, pay attention to your relationship with those foods and how hard is it for you to quit, you know? And
Yeah.
it's always harder when you dabble, when you just try to restrict portion size. It's like, I'm just
Oh,
gonna have a tiny bit of heroin, you know,
absolutely.
as opposed
Exactly.
to abstinence. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 and that's because you develop in addiction a hypersensitivity to the substance, and so I mean, we could call it, if you don't like the word addiction, you could say it's a dopamine hypersensitivity. You know, you've basically overstimulated the dopamine system, and so you get this what a normal reaction to an abnormal environment, you get a hypersensitivity so that just a little bit will inspire more. And dopamine is the neurochemical of more, of want,
Hmm.
of, you know, my want switch is broken or my more switch is broken, it won't stop. That's actually dopamine running amok. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you say that this sensitivity, this heightened sensitivity to the drug as the disease progresses, and I put
Yes.
disease in quotation marks, right?
Yes.
Do you think that that is due to the destruction, the gradual destruction of
Yes.
dopamine receptors over time? So
Yes.
the less you
Absolutely.
have, right, the more sensitized you are to any sort of dopamine hit you get.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's right. And that's why I see a lot of it in my world, because a person's coming in with a cocaine or heroin, dopamine hypersensitivity, and then they think, well, okay, I'm going to quit. And it's okay to have a muffin or eat an extra 3 chocolate bars because they actually have the vending machine in the center. And then they find that they're eating that all the time because it has just morphed into the other addiction.
Right.
It's a human, and it's very, very common to see the alcoholic go to sugar because it gets all 3 neurochemicals, dopamine, serotonin, and endorphin, and also opiates, which is the endorphin receptor, because sugar covers all those bases. So it's almost like a triad of alcohol and opiates and sugar. So if you're addicted to one of those, I don't want to say you're addicted to all of them, but you're definitely a prime candidate to be addicted to all of them.
Yeah, yeah, the addiction interaction disorder too, right? Where you just want to use anything to stimulate the brain chemistry,
Yes.
right? And it is just so common. I was wondering, given that you're seeing and working the addicts with the addicts every single
Yeah.
day, and I don't know, do you call them addicts or is that no longer politically correct? You're more entrenched in this world.
Yeah, I guess, you know, people with substance use disorder, but, you know, addicts is fine.
Got it. Okay, yeah, that's right. I did hear Mike Collins talk about this. You know, they've updated all of the
Yeah.
books and the guidelines to refer to addictions or quote addicts as substance
Yeah.
use disorder. Okay, so what is the number one, or maybe there's more, um, success tips, or what is the differentiator between those who overcome their addiction versus those who relapse chronically?
Okay, so I'm going to answer that question, but I want to sort of answer another question that I'm anticipating that you're going to ask, and I'm just going to pretend that you asked me that one question too, and that is that if you're following a carnivore diet or a super low keto diet, you're not eating sugar anymore or refined carbs. So why is it that you're still thinking about it? And that's because addiction is not just. So this gets to the second part of your question, or your question. It's not just about the food itself. It starts there. I have this introduction to an overstimulation of food, which now has created a tolerance, and this morphed into this thing called addiction. But along the way, we developed, like I said earlier in the podcast, an entrenched habit form, and this is what we call the sort of psychological dependence, often used in the addiction world as triggers. People, places, things. When I go somewhere, I'm used to having a drink there. When I go to a movie, I'm used to having a big thing of popcorn. I can tell you from my own experience that I could not go to movies for 3 years because I just wanted the damn popcorn. And I realized that I was actually more interested in the popcorn, which was of course huge, and then part of my friends who didn't want all of hers. And then when I couldn't have it, I was like, I don't want to go to that movie. I'd rather watch Netflix. And it took me a while to get out of that. So there's entrenched patterns of people, places, things that is not anymore about the food. It's about the psychological cues that have developed. And so what I would say for now to your question, what's the first, like, what are some tips? First of all, you have to get rid of the substance. So if you're following a true keto or a carnivore, you're not eating those substances anyway, because I don't think fat alone can be, I mean, it might be a cue or a trigger, it might be, but generally speaking, it's not. It's with the sugar, and especially with the salt. But anyway, find the offending substance. It's not just sugar. If you're somebody who was into the carbohydrates before and developed a pattern, it might be sugar and flour, and then it might be grains, it might be dairy, it might be cheese. That fits the carnivore because cheese has got casomorphines. So you develop, you have to find out what your trigger foods are. Almost inevitably, it's sugar. Get rid of them. And like you said earlier, there's no dabbling or what we call moderation, because that only stimulates that dopamine, which makes you want, because dopamine is want. So in the same way as you wouldn't eat sugar, and your sugars will, like your blood sugar will go up if you're diabetic, the same way if you eat sugar, if you're an addict, your dopamine will go up, as it were. And like hyperstimulated. And so then therefore, you get caught in the message.
Right. You froze for a second.
So if you're pure carnivore, pure keto, you got to do this. Yeah. Okay. So you have to, first of all, get rid of the food. And then second, what are the triggering behaviors and the triggers? So there's where your sense of sweet comes in. Well, stevia, that's fine, because there's no carbohydrates in that. Yes, it came from the leaf, but it's whatever, it's very no calories. But it's the anticipation of sweet. It's the cue. When I eat sweet, I get sugar. It's powerful. And that's why I'm not a fan of, like you mentioned, Atkins bars and fat bombs and stuff. If they look like dessert, they are dessert, even if their calories are low, and the brain is thinking, this is dessert. You really, what you want to do is get out of that mentality. It's not to say that you don't want to enjoy your food, but you don't want your food to be the reward of the day. It can't be. It was never meant to be. The moment you start doing that, you're taking, you're making it more, and then therefore it will require hyperstimulation. It should be part of the day, absolutely, because we have to enjoy our food to eat it, but it can't be more than that. So that means that you've got to find something else in your life. So the addiction platform is looking at, now I've stopped the substance, now how do I live without the substance? And that's, I think, Sarah, where you're picking up. This is an important issue. It's not just about only eating non-carbohydrates. It's about, now how do I live happily, living in that world? And that's possible. It's because the person hasn't addressed all those other cues, which make people unhappy. I'm gonna let me just finish one more thing here, and then go on to another question. A great example of this is we have I'll have a guy who's an opiate addict. So he needs his methadone or his opiate or whatever it's going to be to get clean. So then he goes to jail, and eventually they might not give him his opiates or they might not give him his methadone, whatever. Eventually he gets off the opiates. Now he's clean, and so 1 year later, totally no opiates in jail, nothing. He should be free of the drug. Walks out, and what happens on day 2? He picks up the drug again. Why? Because he's meeting his buddies. He doesn't know what else to do. And that pull to pick up a drug when you don't physically need it is actually more powerful than the actual withdrawal. So if you're not addressing that secondary piece, the cues, the entrenched habits, you're a walking target for a relapse.
Perfect. Exactly. Yes. And because the physiological dependence is literally the first maybe few weeks, maybe to like, okay, I know we say it takes 2 years for brain chemistry to get back to normal, but really the vast majority of the physiological dependence goes away in the first few weeks, right?
That's right. That's right. And sugar the same. But by the way, if you dabble, as you said, you just prolong the agony. It's like somebody's trying to quit smoking. They're at a pack a day, and then they go to a half a pack, and then to 5 cigarettes a day. They're still constantly wanting a cigarette, and they'll eventually go back up to their pack a day. They have to actually literally stop. And that's the same with sugar. It sounds hard, and it is hard, but only for a few weeks, and then you're free.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's why the vast majority of the work has to do with figuring out better habits so that when you do want to hang around with friends, what are things that are different than what you used to do that would bring you the same level of joy, same level of dopamine activation, right?
Yes.
And it's not going to be easy because it takes like 66 days to form a new habit. Or 66 tries of the same different situation to form a habit,
Okay. But the other thing is that the person has to realize, yes, there's time. And then, the word recovery is you want to recover your own natural ability to live life, your own joy and your own excitement, which is dopamine and serotonin and endorphin. You want to recover those. But the other thing is that this is hard for the addict to hear. I'm going to use the word addict here, is that you're never going to get that same high because that was never meant to be. Like the high that a person gets with drug or with food is we're given that by God, like our God-given nature or our evolutionary whatever. We're given that to have the occasional great day after I've done a good job, after I got married, after I got my certificate or degree. You have those amazing days. So we're given the opportunity to have that amazing experience, but only a few times in our life, not every weekend or every night. And so you're stealing into that territory. So what the person has to learn is life is not going to be a wedding every day. It's not going to be, winning the jackpot every day. It's going to be in the 12-step world, we call it, you're going to trudge your road to happy destiny. Trudge, because a lot of times life is kind of trudging. However, there's going to be those moments throughout that are meant to be to pick you up and give you inspiration. That's why you listen to inspiring speakers and stuff. It doesn't last forever, but it gets you through the trudge until the next inspiration.
Very interesting. Yeah. And I
think
so
you can't expect food to give you that high all the time. Just make it pleasant, and occasionally it'll be amazing.
Right. I agree. And the thing is, if you're having that high every day with the Ben and Jerry's or whatever, then you're still drudging. Is that the word?
Trudging,
right. You're still trudging, right? The next day, all day long, until you have your hit again. So it's the same. Anyway, you're not getting any better or more.
And the trudge is much worse. It's much
exactly. Yeah.
much life is just not super exciting, it's still okay. You know, it's like the difference between going to a concert, a rock concert, and watching it on Netflix. You know, both of them are good. I can't do the concert every day. I can't afford it. I don't have the time, but I got Netflix in between, and that will work. It's fine. Thank you very
Yeah.
much. In fact, now as I get older, I prefer the Netflix because it's too late. The concerts are too late and too loud. Like that's what happens too. You end up just settling. You recover back to your natural, whatever person you're meant to be, you'll be.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Um, I've been wanting to ask you this from the beginning, but so I'm going to ask it right now.
Okay.
What are the general relapse rates for different addictions?
Well, that's, you know what, statistics, I don't know. I'm gonna have to say that's a question I would have had to look up and answer. I can give you a gut response though, that some, generally speaking, people will say that it's only 1 in 10 that succeed in any addiction. Like I'm talking now about like alcohol, drugs, cocaine. Generally, and often when people come into the treatment center, they'll say, you know, look around, and in this room only 2 or 3 of you will be sober in 5 years. And then you could say, okay, well, you know, what's with this? But what those statistics don't show is, do all of those people follow? This is where that's not, maybe that's why I don't have a good answer for you. Do they all follow the recommendations as prescribed? Not everybody does. I think that we can say that the success of addiction treatment is about the same success as a diabetic treatment. When you're trying to ask the person to stop eating sugar, or you got to change their diet, patient non-compliance is so large, and that's why there's such failure. And we see that patient non-compliance with high blood pressure medication, with depression we see it with everything in medicine. Don't expect a recovery rate because there's a high rate of patient non-compliance. And similarly with food, if the person is compliant in addiction, the success rate is actually more like 40 or 50 or 60%. And I could say that that's similar with food. Like I see that too. If they're doing everything, not having the sugar, you know, restricting their foods to meals, not sort of grazing throughout the day. You could call that intermittent fasting. I don't care what, but you have restricted time periods. If you get support, you do all the things you're supposed to do. Sobriety is long lasting. And then the question will be, where in my plan was there a hole if you relapse? Because you could eventually not relapse. Relapse is normal early on, if you're doing it the right way, like doing everything you're supposed to do, because it's going to teach you where you needed to fix something. And then eventually you'll be good. But there's a huge, if you look at the large population where there's a lot of non-compliance, it's probably 10% because people aren't doing everything. They'll say, I don't want to do this. I don't want to call the restaurant and find out if they put sugar in their sauce. Like, I don't want to do this. It's too much trouble. And that's where people get stuck.
Do you think that if there is sugar in some dressing or sauce, but it's not really sweet, like the dressing doesn't taste sweet, you know how they just add a little bit? You can't taste the sweetness. Would you think that it triggers the same addiction as a cue?
You know, that's a good question. Like, at what point does exposure become an actual trigger? And I think that depends on the person's sensitivity. A lot of it is intention. So if you accidentally, like an alcoholic will accidentally, and they're sober, have a drink of something, go and spit it out, go, oh my God, that was that had liquor in it. Chances are it's not going to fire up their desire. If they took that with the intention to have, let's just have a sip, it's actually the intention that causes the problem. It's the psychological piece. You've had some level of protection, which now has had a crack, and the addiction looks for those cracks. If it's sweet and you spit it out, I don't think exposure is a problem. But if your brain goes, hey, that was okay, that wasn't bad. This is actually how a person with addiction relapses. They have one cigarette or they have one whatever, and they go, that wasn't so bad. And then what happens is they start thinking, okay, well then why don't I have another one, but just one? And that's actually the dopamine working, not as a, oh, I want this. It's in the conniving rationalizations. So I think it's more, yeah, I guess that's my answer. When it's a minor amount, I think it's the intention. And then, if you actually get high off of it, like you have a whole piece of something and you go, oh wow, I really like that. Then and you actually taste it and remember the taste, that's another problem because that's triggering the receptors then.
Yeah, I love that answer so much, and I love the intention piece because it just goes to show you the power of our psychology and the power of
Absolutely.
our mindset, right?
Yeah,
And which,
it's like the guy out of jail after a year, and that is an addiction that is as powerful as the initial withdrawal.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly. Which brings me to the last question that I actually would love to interview you again. When because right now I mentioned that I'm in Daytona Beach on vacation. It's a little
yeah.
bit crazy. I barely got enough sleep last night, so I feel like I need to
You're
do another
passionate.
one, with
You're
the
very passionate about this. That's good.
I absolutely am, and just you have a wealth of knowledge and information. Um, so the question is, let's say you restore dopamine receptors with intense exercise, eating right, and let's say balancing your hormones, your microbiome improve.
Yeah,
All those things are going to restore higher baseline levels of circulating dopamine and increased number of dopamine receptors. So let's say you have that in place and that person kind of healed the addictive part of the brain. Can they go back and
yeah.
have the
This,
moderation with, let's
okay.
say,
So
yeah,
this is where I would say it's better to say you're in remission. So if you were uh, again, it's a line, and if you're early stage, because of the fact that we're living in a society where any food addict or not, you're going to eat addictively because that's the job of the food industry is to make those foods addictive. And if you haven't actually had any actual tolerance develop or anything, any of those gradual changes in that toxic environment, and then you just realize, hey, I'm eating addictively. I've eaten too many Girl Guide cookies. I got to stop. That's not good. Then yes, you can moderate because nothing's changed. But if there have actually been changes, it's like with diabetes with insulin resistance. Once there's been a change, you're in remission. But the moment you introduce yourself back to that environment, bam, it comes back. You're back to your sugars are super high or your dopamine cravings are super high. I don't think there's a line at which you cross at which no, there is no going back.
right.
There is none. But if it's early, that's what we say, and that's why it's useful to know. Am I just addicted to food because it's addictive food, or is it because I'm actually now becoming food addicted? Like the syndrome of food addiction has actually developed. That's why that term disorder and disease, it's more than just a response to the environment. Now something's changing in me. And if that's changed in me, there's no going back. I have to now be super careful. I am now
Right.
a person in remission. I can look normal, but as long as I stay eating well.
That that brings up this comparison with somebody that say who has type 2 diabetes who's in remission because they went keto or carnivore and they no longer have blood sugars that's above 126, right, milligram. Okay, so can
Right.
these,
Yeah.
if you're a recovered type 2 diabetic, do you want to go back and have the oatmeal and the rice? Of course not, right? Because you're more
Right.
sensitive to that. You're gonna go back very
Exactly.
quickly, right? And I feel like that's the same thing with the addiction
Very
brain.
same idea. Yeah, very same idea. We're just talking about dopamine receptors instead. That's why I encourage people to see addiction as almost like a dopamine resistance syndrome. I mean,
Mm,
or hypersensitivity, but you can say dopamine resistance too. Like there's something that's changed. Um,
right.
yeah.
I love that analogy. Yeah. Because I do get those questions a lot, especially when I start talking about carnivore and no sugar, none of that stuff. And
Yeah.
people in the beginning, it's hard to wrap their heads around the fact that they're never gonna have a piece of cake ever
No, because that's their addiction speaking.
Right.
It's that's no, you can't say that.
Uh-oh. We have another break in our internet connection. Let's see.
Have a bottle of wine at night to get to sleep. And then it became, how will I not have my Haagen-Dazs ice cream before I get to sleep? Oh, do you want me to say that all day?
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
it worked. I don't know. It like it freezes, but then
Yeah.
it tells like you everything you said happens like really fast, and I can get everything you said.
Okay,
So
okay,
yeah,
yeah.
I maybe because we're here, I think the internet isn't as strong. So which is why I am definitely gonna reach out really soon again, and we'll see what our audience wants you to answer. Write them in
Sure.
the comment section below, and I'll prepare a new set of questions because I know that I have a gazillion also additional question that I
Sure.
would want to ask you, but yeah, I definitely would want to do another part to go a little bit deeper. Thank you so much, Dr. Tarman. Where can people find you, your book, all the good stuff, your podcast?
Okay, so if you're interested, if you're interested in this area and wanting to learn more, please get my book on Amazon, Food Junkies, Recovery from Food Addiction. It's very readable, and it gives everything that I've said and more. And then we, of course, have the Food Junkies podcast, which is the updated sort of live version of that topic. So talking to all the people that we think are going to give good information about food addiction. And then I have my Facebook, I have my YouTube channel as well, which has all of the social media that I do, whoever is willing to let me have links, including the podcast. So that's just Vera Tarman. And then we have a Facebook group, which is free, that's called I'm Sweet Enough, Sugar-Free for Life. And if you think you want to be in a supportive environment to get clean, join that group and just say, hi, I'm new, what do I do, or whatever, and you'll get lots. It's a very vibrant community. I really encourage people to go to that. And I think those are the three main ways to find out more.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I will make sure to link everything in the description box below so people can find
Thank
you
you.
very easily. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us. I hope you enjoyed this kind of content. If you did, make sure you give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that little notification bell icon so YouTube alerts you every time I post a new video. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one.